And we are live. What's up, guys? Welcome to Fresh Air Podcast, man. We're here with Dave Smith. Let's get into it.
Let's go. All right.
And we are live. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fresh Air Podcast. We got a special guest in the house. We got Dave Smith, man, which I am super excited to do this interview with him. I've been a supporter of his work for a while. I remember seeing a lot of his stuff on Rogan. I was like, man, this guy got some pretty good takes. Would be cool to talk to him one day, and here he is, man. So this was probably like a year or two ago when I saw him. So let's bring him on screen real quick, guys.
Even I know who he is.
What's up, Dave? Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
To be honest with you, we only brought you on so they wouldn't call us anti-Semite.
Well, this is the first step. Although, from what I've seen this week, you're not going to be fully protected by that, but it'll help.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, hey, man, what's up? Welcome to the podcast, bro. For those that are unaware of who you are, can you please introduce yourself to the people that have been living under a rock?
Sure. Well, I'm sure there's people who know me and people who don't know me, but I'm Dave Smith. I'm a stand-up comedian and a podcaster and a libertarian, and I do a lot of shows, and that's my life.
No, awesome. Can you kind of give the people like your backstory, like where you came from, where you grew up, etc.?
Sure. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And I was a New Yorker for my entire life. I lived there up until 2020, and I moved when the lockdowns started. And I live out in the country now, about an hour outside. So not like too far, but out in a rural area. Aside from that, I grew up as a typical kind of like Brooklyn kid. I had a single mom, and was never like super political or anything like that, but probably like more liberal than anything else. Mm-hmm. And then I started stand-up comedy after I dropped out of college. I started stand-up comedy about 18 years ago, and then I became very interested in politics in 2007, 2008, and then I was kind of like just a degenerate comedian for many years after that. And then about 6-7 years ago, I got married and settled down and had a couple kids. And then over the last couple years, things have been picking up.
Nice.
And business has been better.
So you mentioned earlier that you left New York, and I'm actually really excited to ask this because I get to finally ask one of you guys. Why did you in particular leave New York? Right, because Miami has been, dude, New Yorkers have just come here and filled the city up and transplants everywhere. Luckily, you didn't come down to Florida. You went, you're not Florida, right? I'm guessing you're probably somewhere else.
No. I'm in New Jersey. I'm like an hour outside of New York City.
So you're not that far.
That's not even bad.
But yeah, that's not even that bad.
It's the same thing.
But yeah, why? Because obviously, like after 2020, everyone left New York. Like, what were your main reasons? Like, I got to get the hell out of here. Was it the lockdowns? Was it the extreme leftism? Is it just the crime? Because I think New York City's failed.
Yes. Well, I agree with you that it's failed. And by the way, I've had to fight moving to Florida a few different times. That Patrick Bet David has tried to get me down there, and he's made it pretty tempting.
Yeah.
But so what happened with me was, me and my wife, we had our first child at the very end of 2018. So through 2019, we were living on the Upper West Side of New York City. And my wife was, she's from like the suburbs. I'm from New York City, but she's from the burbs. And she kind of wanted she was kind of like, I'd really kind of rather go like get a house and have a big yard and have our kids in like a nice, town. And at the beginning of 2019, I was kind of like, no, we're not doing that. New York City is where I'm from. This is where my career is. I'm going to stay here. This is kind of where the action is. Mm-hmm. And I will say, as time went on, I just kind of started to agree with her a little bit more. Like I was like, yeah, it would kind of be nice to have a house, and it would kind of be nice to like have some space and just be around something a little bit prettier than New York City. Yeah. And okay, so my kid was born in December of 2018. So I have like a baby at this point. Mm-hmm. But and she's a girl, my oldest. And so as she's like 3 months, 4 months old, things like that. Like little babies don't really know what's going on, but as their dad, I did just start to notice like things I had always just taken for granted in my life, like homeless people all over the place. And then, you're kind of like, like this isn't a big problem right now, but do I really want her when she's 2, when she's 3, like just kind of seeing all of this stuff, all the stuff that I saw really early in life that I just kind of took for granted. But now I'm thinking to myself, maybe I actually don't want this. So I kind of started moving in the direction of like, maybe I do kind of want to get out of the city and put my girls in a little bit of a more secluded environment where they won't be around this stuff. And I'll tell you, it was like the gods came down, because I was renting an apartment on the Upper West Side, which, but as far as New York City goes, is like one of the nicest neighborhoods you could be in. I was
gonna say.
But so our lease was up. I believe it was up in either April or May of 2020.
Oh, right in the middle. At the worst time.
And so then the lockdowns hit in March.
Yeah.
And so the lockdowns hit and things started getting a little bit weird. And I got very the shelves started getting kind of empty very early on. Mm-hmm. And so immediately, I mean, even before the actual lockdowns hit, it was like the week before that, we got our stuff and got out of there. Okay. And then we went and we stayed at her parents' house for like a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And then I was just like, once the lockdowns actually hit and I knew my lease was coming up anyway, I was like, all right, you know what? Yeah. I concede. You win this. It's not
worth the lower price
debate.
Of rent. It's not worth it. I'm out of here. Because that was the first time New York rent ever dropped.
Well, so the rent dropped, but then it went right back up like shortly after that. But so I immediately, because we were like in a little apartment that you're paying like an insane amount for. Yeah. So immediately I started renting a house out there, and for the same price that I was renting a little apartment in New York City, I got like this beautiful house out in Jersey. And then so like right away I was like, oh, I could kind of get used to this. This is not. And then as things were kind of crazy through the next couple years, then we ultimately ended up buying a house like out in the country, like really out there. And I gotta say, it's I never thought I could live outside of New York City because I was just so used to it, but it is the best decision I've ever made. I am so much happier and just enjoy life so much more being in the country than I ever did in the city.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always said, in my opinion, I think New York City is the most overrated place on earth, and it's not till like you leave that you realize, wow, there's, places that are way better. I grew up there as a kid, in the early 90s, but I moved after. I was actually in Brooklyn too. I moved to Connecticut when I was like 9, so I don't consider myself a New Yorker. But I do remember, like, there was a crime wave in the 90s. I remember Giuliani coming in and cleaning up the streets and everything else like that. You're a bit older than me, so do you remember the Giuliani era? Are you a fan of Giuliani?
I'm not a fan of Giuliani for many reasons, but there's no question that during those years, New York City turned around. Yeah. And, it was really drastic. So I'm 41. I was born in 83, and Giuliani came in like I don't know, 92, maybe
Yeah.
something like that.
Early mid 90s he came in, and 1990 was the worst year, had the most murders, or
It was
91.
the David Dinkins years were like crazy. Now, of course, I was, in 1990, I was 7.
Yeah.
So it's not like I have like, like the best memories of it, or I wasn't like hanging out in adult situations, but I do remember just like, I mean, everything got stolen.
Yeah.
In New York City. I mean, you couldn't literally, I mean, things that it sounds like cartoonish to say, but you had to not only, you had to chain up your garbage cans that were in front of your house. And then we found this out, literally, this is not an exaggeration, that my stepfather chained up the garbage cans and they stole the garbage lids.
Wow.
So he had to separately chain up the garbage lids and the garbage cans, because like that's just how because it was like crackhead crime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it didn't even make sense. They were just trying to take whatever they could take and go see if they could sell it or whatever. And then, but even after Giuliani came in, like it, when I was like an older kid, like, a preteen and a teenager, it was still a high crime environment in New York City that was like way worse than what any big city is today.
Yeah. It's New York City used to literally be. They used to call it Fear City in the 70s, and then it's kind of stuck with that name into the 80s. And the 90s, it was still terrible. I think the most murders were 91 or 90. And Brooklyn, I mean, it's interesting now. Like if you go to Brooklyn now, in a lot of these places, it's going through extreme gentrification. Because a lot of those yuppies got pushed out of Manhattan, and now the places that used to be terrible you would never go to in Brooklyn, like they're a lot cleaner and safer now with hipsters. So
yeah, for sure. And even I don't even know exactly what explains it, but it's not just that the people got pushed out of Manhattan, because there's parts of Brooklyn now that are more expensive than Manhattan. Like it's I don't know, out of like I choose not to be there. But out of my group of friends that I grew up with, I think I might be the only one who could afford to still live in the neighborhood we came from if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Everybody got priced out.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. New York City, how expensive it's gotten, and I don't know how people make ends meet. It's just crazy. So you talked about becoming a comedian. Like, how did you get into that, and what was it like in the beginning? Because that's a very tough career to build some traction on, make some money, etc. Most comics are obviously very poor and do it on the side is for fun, but you've been able to make it a real career. How'd you do that?
Okay, so I got into stand-up comedy because I was my buddy, who's like my brother, my best friend for the last fucking 20 years or whatever it is, Louis J. Gomez he was like dating one of my sister's friends, and I met him through that. And me and him just like got along immediately and started hanging out. And he was like, he was promoting for a comedy club. Like he was selling tickets on the street for one of the comedy clubs in New York City. And then because he was like the top promoter, he started like hosting shows that he was producing. And so anyway, we ended up being friends for a while. And then we got a place together. We were roommates for a little bit. Like I was like, I don't know, 21 or something like that. And he basically like convinced me to start. Like he was like, dude, you're so fucking funny. I think you'd be great at this. I'm doing it and it's going good. And it was just like a thing to like, like be cool and meet girls or whatever. And for a while I fought it. It was like for over a year, I think he was trying to convince me to start. And then eventually I was like, all right, let's go do it. And I went to an open mic at Stand Up New York Comedy Club on 78th Street and Broadway in New York City.
Okay.
And it was terrible.
And this is like what year? 2007-ish?
2006, I want to say.
Okay.
I believe it was 2006.
Okay.
And so I go on stage to a room of 15 other open micer comedians. And it was just like, it's just an awful environment to do comedy. And I don't remember what it is I said, but I had one thing I said that got like a laugh in the room. And I remember literally when it got that laugh, I loved it. And then I got off stage and I was like, I think I could do better than that. let's go hit another open mic. And we went and hit other open mic that night. And then it went a little bit better. And I'm saying after that, it was like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. That's it. I just loved it so much. I always thought there's something so beautiful about stand-up comedy. Like it's this weird art form where one guy goes up on stage with no instrument, just his mind, and then like can get the whole room to be cracking up laughing. I thought it was such a beautiful thing, and I just totally fell in love with it, and I've been doing it ever since.
Would you say that most comedians bust their first couple shows? Is natural to happen? Like you come on stage, you like don't make it at all?
You know, I mean, if you come on stage a couple times and then quit after that, then you never really like did comedy. But regardless of how your first couple shows go, I think almost every comedian has to go through a lot of rough sets, a lot of just busting their ass, a lot, you know, it's almost like is there a skateboarder who's never wiped out?
Gotcha.
Like, probably not. You know, that's kind of part of the game, is that you're going to fall and hurt yourself. But hopefully once you kind of start getting good at it, that becomes rarer and rarer.
Well, we know 2 Phil comedians in Canada.
This guy.
That was a good thing.
This guy. Insider joke.
Wait, who's that? Who are the? Was that a joke I was supposed to get?
Nah. Fuck those guys. They're nobodies. You don't know who they are. So, but yeah. So, because here's the thing, I ain't gonna lie. I've never admitted this on air, but I'm gonna admit it. I've actually kind of wanted to try it. I've actually wanted to get on a stage and tell some jokes.
You'd be hilarious, bro.
I think I could do it. But the thing is that going back to what Dave just said, like, I don't want people booing me and shit. I'm like, fuck, I suck. You know, so it's just like, because it's not easy, dude. That's why I have a great deal of respect for comedians, because you got to get like beat up. You got to really rehash your routine. You got to try it in front of different audiences. You have to be able to adapt to your audience, right? You got to know which jokes to make on certain people. And I had a discussion with the Hodge twins about this in detail. And I've always had like a very deep admiration for comics, because it's not easy, dude, to sit there and kind of read the room and adjust accordingly, because doing it live is not easy. And you got to be able to think on top of your feet. What would you say are some of the most important traits to be an effective comedian? What are some of the things that you learned, you know, through your years, now better, almost 2 decades of telling jokes?
Well, you know, it's a weird thing, because like being a comedian it's as broad a category as like being a podcaster, right? So like, you know, whether you could have a show or whatever, podcast or streamer, influencer, whatever whatever we call these shows on the internet. But like, as you guys know, I mean, you guys have a very successful show that, at least from what I understand, was like largely centered around kind of like dating, masculinity, cultural issues, things like that. And obviously you guys talk about politics and other things. But then there's shows that are about diet. There's shows that are about working out. There's shows that are about mixed martial arts. There's shows that are about anything you could think of. So likewise with stand-up comedy, it's not as if there's like one way you can be good at this. There's an infinite amount of ways that you can be good at this. There's comedians. I remember Patrice O'Neill, who I had got to meet when I first started comedy, who's one of the most brilliant, incredible human beings I've ever met in my life. I remember he said that he said the beauty of stand-up comedy is you could talk about the war in Iraq. This is when that was, you know, the relevant thing. He goes, you could talk about the war in Iraq, or you could talk about your balls. Like, it doesn't matter. It could be any topic from that to that.
Yeah.
And so what it really takes to kind of be good at stand-up comedy, I mean, like being a funny person is very helpful, and that's just kind of something that either is in you or you develop or whatever. You probably came in with that. But what it really takes to be a good stand-up comedian is kind of this ability to stick with it and find your voice and figure out who you are going to be. Just like with podcasting or with any of these shows, it's like, it's the ability to like figure out what is it that you really bring to the table, because all of us have essentially infinite issues or infinite things that somebody else is better than you at. But if you can find the thing that makes you special, and really kind of exploit that, then you could do something really great. And I think it's very similar in comedy, in broadcasting and podcasting, and in a lot of different areas in life. I think that's kind of what it takes to be successful.
So say someone's watching this right now, right? And they're kind of like me. I want to do this. I want to try it. I want to go to an open mic, right? Maybe an improv class, something like that. How long should their first routine be that they, write out and script out? How many minutes do you think?
I mean, I don't even, in the same way that, okay, like I've never served in the military, but if somebody was like, hey, I just saw this video of you, like, blowing up some helicopter, I kind of want to do that. What's the first step to that? And I think somebody who's in the military they wouldn't be like, okay, you want to go down and find a recruiter, or you want to do this, or I think they would probably be like, hey, like, bust out 50 push-ups, like, how does that feel? Are you okay? Can you get through that? Did you fail after 10? Then, like, okay, maybe you should do, okay, so fail after 10 and then come back and do another, you know what I mean, like the round tomorrow. I think that if you forget how long your set is that you should write, if you want to do it, what I say is go to a local open mic and go do that, and then get off stage and then talk to me.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then tell me if you still want to do it. Or if you just, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, in the same way that, like, if people came up to one of you two and they were like, hey, I want to have a really successful show just like you guys have. What should I do?
Yeah.
It's like, well, the first thing is go do a show where no one gives a shit what you're saying. No one cares at all. And then tell me, do you still want to do this? Yeah. Did you just want to be famous? Did you just want to be rich? Or did you actually want to do this show? So that's kind of like my first thing. You're never going to write a great 15 minutes of stand-up comedy when you've never been on stage before. That's just not going to happen. Yeah. So go get on stage, do bad, and then see if you really still want to do this or not.
So, Dave, I think comedians have a superpower where they can talk about anything pretty much and not get canceled for it. Yeah. For the most part. And I was curious to know your top 3 comedians.
I was literally going to ask that next. Yeah, I was literally going to ask that next.
Top 3 comedians.
Top 3 comedians of all time. Ooh.
For you.
It's that's tough because it's almost like what era they were in, like, okay. In the Killing Them Softly and For What It's Worth era, like those 2 specials and the Chappelle Show, Dave Chappelle to me was like about as funny as any stand-up comedian could be.
Right.
Louis C.K. when he was at the top of his game.
Okay.
Just jerking off on chicks at the top. He was pretty incredible. Bill Burr when he was at the top of his game was incredible. And then more personally, Dave Attell and Patrice O'Neal, who are the guys who I got to like watch in the New York City scene when I first started, were just like phenomenal to me. But I will say there's so many great comedians that it's like, there's somebody else you could bring up right now who I might be like, yeah, maybe that guy's the best, or maybe he's, it's very, it's not like a sport where there's like, who's better, Jordan or LeBron, where you're kind of at least comparing them doing the exact same thing. It's more like, a thing where you're like, okay, who's better, your cardiologist or your, podiatrist? And you're like, I don't know. Yeah. They take care of different things, like they're just, it's just different. But those guys were all just incredible to me at their height.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, to this day, like the Dave Chappelle, he did this one skit on public transportation, since you mentioned busting nuts, on public transportation, how this homeless dude shot like a nut on somebody at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then the Native American one also makes me laugh when he says like how he was in a store in the sport section, and like a Native American dude was there, and he talks about smoking weed with them.
Did you ever hear his bit on that same special that you're talking about? That was For What It's Worth. Yeah. But when he has the bit, as look, this was like one of the most incredible things I've ever seen, because this is Dave Chappelle. It was in between season 1 and season 2 of Chappelle's show. So he's finally got this show. It's blown up. He's an A-list celebrity now after just being like a working comic for many years. And in the middle of his show, he's killing it. And he does the bit about R. Kelly and the whole how old is 15 really?
Oh, yeah. How old is 15 really? Yeah.
Dude, he literally, and this was what was so incredible to me, with the premise of the bit, he loses the crowd.
Yeah.
Like he goes, how old is 15 really? Yeah. And the whole crowd gets so weird. And then he goes, no, that's a good question.
Yeah.
And then he has this long bit where basically he gets into like this black girl who was kidnapped and this white girl who was kidnapped. And then he gets into this black 15-year-old who killed a guy accidentally doing like backyard wrestling. Yeah. And they tried him like an adult. Yeah. And then he's like, well, if at 15 you could be tried like an adult, then it's old enough to get pissed on. And there's this whole thing, and like it's so funny the way he does it. You're uncomfortable the whole time, but you're like also laughing, and then also by the end you're like, I think he did make a good point actually with all of this. And it was just like really, really high level, like really hilarious and really smart and provocative, and like that to me is like what stand-up comedy is supposed to be.
Yeah, it was fantastic, because I remember this. It's actually embarrassing that I even remember this. He talks about a girl named Elizabeth Smart that escaped being tied up from some crackheads, and she was only 15 years old and was able to find her way back. Right? He made this joke like, oh, I know where I'm at. Fuck off me. There's 2 exits. and then the kid that you're talking about, because I remember this story broke out like in the 2000s. He did a wrestling move. I think he rock bottomed his sister or some shit and killed her.
Lionel Tate.
15-year-old kid.
Lionel Tate.
Lionel Tate killed his sister.
Damn.
And then he brought it back. Hey, if they could do all this, you should be able to piss on him, which was hilarious, because he brought it back and reminded everybody
she was
how 15 is.
I think she was single-digit age.
Yeah, it was his little sister.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So no, it was a funny bit.
And look, it's not again like comedy is not literal. It's not that like literally what he's saying is true, but it does just start to like, even things like that, it does kind of make you ask the question where you're like, okay, so like, look, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but if a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old could be convicted of murder, tried as an adult, like because they did something bad, you can say, okay, they're an adult now. They have to face adult consequences. Then it does just make you go like, okay, well then like that's not really consistent with like saying that, oh, okay, no, that's only a child. He can't consent. So perhaps the answer is that 15-year-olds should never be tried as adults. That kind of, maybe that is the answer. I don't exactly know, but I know that that's a good enough, like he found a ripple in the universe that's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. It can't be this and this. In the same way that like, I'm sure you guys have heard like the dumb feminist arguments where they'll be like all drunk sex is rape or something like that. Yeah. Where it's like, oh, if you gave a girl a couple drinks, even if she consented, you're still a rapist. Yeah. And you're like, okay, well, if that's true, then we shouldn't charge anyone with drunk driving. You know, like if you're saying that when you're drunk, you no longer have agency, then okay, but just be consistent. And there's something about like just finding those inconsistencies that even if you don't have all the right answers, it's still a beautiful thing to go like, okay, something here is full of shit. This doesn't make sense.
And Bill Burr, I think, made a joke on this. And I remember this because, and I'm really exposing myself right now. I remember Bill Burr went on a legendary rant in Philadelphia, and he literally, like, because they were just booing him out of the fucking place, and he just went on like a 7 or 8 minute, fucking tirade, just shitting all over Philadelphia, how the Eagles suck, how their city sucks, how they're a bunch of fucking losers. He went crazy, and it's funny because if you've ever been to Philadelphia, you're like, he's kind of right. Philly does suck. This is like the worst city on the Northeast. So it's just like he just fucking bombarded them for fucking like 7 to 8 minutes straight, and I think it's probably one of the best improv situations where he was able to take like an L and turn it into a huge W. I really think everybody should go check it out. But like, I'm sure you saw that, Dave.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, okay, so me and like another guy, because this has got to be like right around when I first started. It was like in those years. Maybe this was like 2008 or something like that. Yeah, it was right
around then, yeah.
And so I remember me and one of my buddies who was like another young comic at the time, we went up to Bill Burr at the Comedy Cellar like a few weeks after that. And we were both like, yo, dude, that was like the greatest thing ever, man. Like, that's so awesome. It was like a viral video at the very beginning of viral videos on the internet. And he goes, really, dude? I did an HBO special this year, and that's all I'm known for now. Really? Is it great, dude? Blah, blah, blah. And like, he just like kind of like busted our balls about it. But then I think he was worried a little bit that he was like, oh, this is what I'm going to be known for now. Like, this is all, now everyone's going to try to heckle me because they want to create a moment where I'm fucking trashing everybody. But of course, he went on to, you know, be known for a lot of other stuff because he just kept being so good at comedy. But no, I remember that was on the Opie and Anthony tour. And it was one of the greatest. You guys, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's all over the internet. It's such a great like comedian riff meltdown thing. It's just amazing.
And you know, and it also speaks volumes because like if you've ever been to Philadelphia, for those that haven't been, like they're one of the worst crowds, man. Like this city. It's fucking strange. Like whether they win or they lose, the city's getting fucked up.
Who wants to live there anyway?
Like, they're some of the most passionate but toxic fans ever. Like they literally, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the fucking water or some shit in the Schuylkill River, but something is off over there where they will destroy their city no matter what. Like if they're in
I mean, some of my best friends are born and raised in Philadelphia, and even they will agree when I say they are garbage people, man. I mean, I love Philly. It's a great city, but garbage.
Yeah, it sucks, man. It really sucks. It's just, and it's still one of the few cities that like holds on to some of its roots. So like South Philly is still super Italian, right? North Philly still sucks. I don't know. It is what it is because I spent a good amount of time there. But no, so I guess let's switch on over to like the politics. You mentioned that you really started getting into politics 2007, 2008. What prompted you to get in? Was it like Obama's speeches at the time? Because I remember he was taking over. He was like the cool person back then. Was it your like or dislike of Bush? What made you like really, you know, get into politics as a comedian?
Okay, so I actually really liked George W. Bush right after September 11th when he came to New York City and he gave that bullhorn speech. Yes. If you guys have ever seen it,
legendary.
Where he goes, dude, when he said he goes to all of the people in New York, we hear you. And he said, like, we hear you and Washington, D.C. hears you. And pretty soon, the people who knock these towers down, they're going to hear from you as well.
Yeah.
And I was like, yo, I was 18 at the time. I was like, yo, that is my fucking president. I love this guy. I mean, I was so on board with like, oh, these motherfuckers hit us and they have no idea who they just hit. Like, we're the toughest killers in the history of the world. We're going to go get all these guys. So I was like totally on board at that point, but just a kid, like an idiot. I didn't know anything. And then fast forward to like there was like a few years later, and it was after he had already invaded Iraq and we had been bogged down in Afghanistan for a while, and it was like, what, we're trying to overthrow the Taliban, and why are we fighting Saddam Hussein? And then there was one press conference where someone asked him, they were like, hey, you know, it's been forever and you still haven't gotten Osama bin Laden. And, you know, like, what's up with that? And he said, you guys go find this. It's been a long time since I watched this video, but I'm not far off. He said essentially, like, I don't really care. It's not even something I think about. Like, I'm focused on other things.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that and it was like, yo, I hope you fucking burn in hell, dude. Like, really, motherfucker? You came here after we got hit and promised us that you were going to go get these motherfuckers. And now you're telling me you don't even care, but you actually had some totally separate beef because, like, something with your dad being an attempted assassination or something like that is what I knew at the time, you know? And And so then I was like, screw him. And I was rooting when the Democrats won the Congress back in 2006. And then when Barack Obama started running, I was like, oh, okay, this guy seems really smart and charismatic, and maybe he'll be kind of the next like JFK, and he's totally against the Bushes. And anyway, so then it was in 2007. I literally just happened to be watching the Republican presidential debate, and I saw it was the Ron Paul versus Rudy Giuliani moment. Do you guys know? You know what that is?
No. What this is 07. Because
yes.
Because I'm trying to think here. Obama ran against McCain, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Okay. So this is in the Republican primaries before McCain had won it.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is the Republican primaries, and okay, so Rudy Giuliani had started that year's Republican primary as the front runner. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately he got knocked out, and then McCain ended up winning the nomination. Yeah. But Ron Paul was running for president that year, so he was one of the guys on the debate stage, and he was a libertarian but a Republican, like in Rand Paul's father, and like a Thomas Massey, Rand Paul type, hardcore, but even more hardcore than them, like a hardcore libertarian, but who was a Republican in Texas.
Gotcha.
And so he gets up and he goes, and I really encourage you both and anyone in your audience to go watch this if you haven't already. And maybe for the younger guys, it might be even tough to understand how crazy this was in 2007. But so Ron Paul's up there, and at the time, the line was, they hate us because we're free. This was the George W. Bush line.
Yes.
That, hey, the reason these Muslims hate you is because you're so free and so rich that they just want to blow you up because they're possessed by evil or something. I don't know exactly what the logic was, but they just hate freedom and hate prosperity. So they want to kill you. Yeah. And so Ron Paul, this guy I'd never heard of before, he gets on stage and he goes, well, no. Listen, let me tell you something. The terrorists don't hate us because we're rich and we're free. They hate us because we're over there. They hate us because we're propping up Israel. Mm-hmm. We're bombing Muslim countries. We're propping up brutal dictators in Muslim countries. Our sanctions are like starving their children to death. This is why they hate us. And he goes, now look, we're never, he said, I think his exact words were, he goes, if you think we can go around the world doing whatever we want with no risk to us, then we do that at our own peril. And so he's going off on this. And then Rudy Giuliani, to get back to why I don't like him so much, Rudy Giuliani interrupts him, and he goes, I think Ron Paul should apologize for what he just said. I've heard a lot of ridiculous explanations for September 11th, and I've never heard anything like we were bombing Iraq and that's why 9/11 happened. I've never heard anything like that, which is, by the way, was in Osama bin Laden's, letter to America, in his declaration of war against America. He specifically mentioned this. So Rudy Giuliani was just bragging about having never heard something that you probably should have heard if you know what the fuck you're talking about. Yep. And so he goes, okay, so he gets thunderous applause for calling Ron Paul out. And then he goes, I'd ask that Ron Paul apologize and tell us that he didn't really mean that. And then that gets thunderous applause. And then it goes back over to Ron Paul, and they're like, Ron Paul, would you like to apologize? And Ron Paul just goes, okay, I very sincerely believe that, how the CIA coined this term called blowback? Yeah, that's a real thing. Blowback exists. And he just goes through this whole history lesson where he was like, look, you want to know why Iran hates us? It's because in 1953, our CIA overthrew their democratically elected government. That's why they hate us. Not because they're crazy Muslims, because we've been fucking with them. And went through this whole thing. And whatever, as soon as it was done, I was just like, yo, who the fuck was that guy?
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone in the political sphere ever just say some real shit the way he did. And then it was just like, that was the spark. And then I was like, okay, I want to read his book. I want to, and then I just like fell down the rabbit hole and got obsessed with this stuff.
Wow.
You know, and I really just, because I think it's very significant that he said that back then, because to question the war, to talk about geopolitical situations like this back then when we were in the middle of invading Iraq, etc., to question that back then was unprecedented and wildly, ahead of its time.
Unheard of.
Now, right? I mean, I think people are just waking up to the Iraq situation, like now, 2024, right? Decades after the fact. So for someone to call this out back then is crazy. And not let alone doing it on a national stage in front of everyone and saying, look, this is what it really is. And I think more Americans are waking up to this now. And it's interesting, right? Because obviously it's the anniversary of 9/11. And, I remember when it first went down, we were like, yeah, we're going to go after everybody. This is Osama. This is the axis of evil, etc. Like, it was the most united time I've ever seen the United States. And that the whole bullhorn comment that you made, like, people thought that was fucking awesome. He's like, I hear you, America hears you, and the people that knock these towers down are going to hear all of us, right? And I remember the day when it happened, he addressed the country. And to this day, I still use that as an example whenever I tell guys like the definition of like controlling frame and, being a leader. Mm-hmm. His address to the United States right after 9/11, I think, was probably one of the best examples of leading during one of the most turbulent times in our nation's history.
But look, I mean... It also shows you, like, why is that so powerful? And I think that if you really understand that, in a weird way, it makes you understand Ron Paul's point. Yeah. It's like, if you understand that, like, look, after 9/11, if an American leader stands up and goes, let me tell you something, I'm going to protect you from another 9/11 ever happening. And you know how we're going to do it? And maybe they don't say these exact words, but they go, we're going to go kill all these motherfuckers over there. It's very easy to go, yes, fuck yeah. And like, I think that there was something about that to me that it was always very easy for me to kind of understand that, like, like, put yourself in the situation. If someone you loved got killed in front of you, it's not that hard to imagine that you'd be like, well, I want to go kill all of these guys. Yeah. Like, that's just, but then, okay, so extrapolate that out to like other conflicts. And then even just the same thing, it's like, okay, well, why do these Muslim terrorists want to come kill you? For the same reasons, for the exact same reasons, because some bomb blew up over there and their friend got killed. And they were like, well, I'm ready. And why is it that so many people in Israel after October 7th will want to go, but will support? I'm not talking about like the higher up political leaders. I'm just saying like a regular person will go, hell yeah, go flatten Gaza. Yeah. It's like, okay. And why is it that so many Palestinians are like, drive every single one of these Jews into the sea? Because they've seen some shit happen to someone they love. Like, I'm not saying this isn't the final analysis. This doesn't justify any of these actions, but it's a pretty good starting point to at least go like, okay, I can understand why someone in that situation could get there pretty easily.
Yeah. So did you have something fresh?
Yeah. So it's crazy because the government lied basically about what the issue was, and they put blame on these people overseas, and kind of find out, speaking of today and 9/11, we know who the real culprit was behind it.
Yeah, and we'll definitely, we could definitely talk about
wait a minute. Who's that?
Well, from what we've been told, what we've seen and discovered, Myron knows the answer.
Bro, what the fuck? All right. We'll talk about 9/11 here in a second.
Sure.
But I was going to ask you, so that kind of got you going down the rabbit hole. Can you explain to the people what the libertarian perspective is and what some of your guys' viewpoints are? Because, we've seen over the past 10 years, the Overton window kind of shift. Like, someone that was a liberal 10 years ago now is considered alt-right, because the left has gone so far left. So can you just explain to people, like, what a libertarian is, what your views are now in 2024, generally speaking, and yeah.
Sure. So, like, I would just first say that in the same way, like, libertarian, and I think for a while, maybe I was kind of fighting for that word. Like, that means what I say it means. But I ultimately, look, like, in the same way that, like, you're like, what does a liberal believe, or what does a conservative believe?
Yeah.
You know, if you were to say, what does a conservative believe, you could get a self-described conservative who would say a conservative believes supporting Israel no matter what.
Yeah.
And then you could get other conservatives who say a conservative means never sending any U.S. tax dollars to any other country. So, you know, just a quick preface, like, a lot of other people could have definitions of what a libertarian means. To me, what a libertarian means is fundamentally that people have natural rights, that people have the right to live their life. They have the right to life, liberty, and property, and they have a right to live their life and do what they want as long as they do not, violate the rights of others, impose their will on others. And then, more broadly, politically speaking, it would be a belief that government should be as limited as possible, that we should be as non-interventionist in every sense of the word, whether that's domestically or in terms of foreign policy, that America's role ought to be to keep our people as free as possible and to intervene as little as possible within domestic or foreign affairs. So in other words, domestically speaking, the level of intervention should be if somebody is attacking somebody else, we should support their right and even help them to defend themselves or bring that person to justice. And in terms of foreign policy, if we are attacked, we should defend ourselves and destroy our enemy, or even prevent an attack from happening. But we should not be in the business of taking care of people from cradle to grave at home. We should not be in the business of welfare and education and healthcare and everything else. And we also, in terms of foreign policy, we should not be in the business of, like, policing the world and propping up this dictator and overthrowing this dictator, or propping up this democratically elected government and overthrowing this democratically elected government. That all of that is just not the proper role for government. That would be, like, broad strokes, what I would say.
Gotcha. Now, with some of your, what are some of your takes on this stuff? Where do you stand? And I'll kind of just go into some of the more common issues that everyone talks about. What's your take on immigration?
Okay, so I would say, and both my personal take and the libertarian take essentially is, I actually think that Tucker Carlson had this analogy that was like the perfect libertarian explanation of immigration, even though I think Tucker would have said that he wouldn't have thought of it that way. And I think he was actually a bit hostile to libertarians when he said this. But so, like, his thing was, he said, I love having dinner parties. I'm really into dinner parties, which, by the way, I like that a lot too. I like having, like, some people over to my house. You got like 12 or 15 people over to your house, and you have dinner and you have some drinks and everybody has a good conversation. And he goes, but I get to choose who comes to my house. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's not really a dinner party, is it?
Gotcha. All right.
So like, if a bunch of people just show up and invade my house, that's not really a dinner party. That's something else. So I think, in essence, the libertarian position, like, purely theoretically, would be that I think the people who live in this country ought to be able to decide who comes in and who doesn't. In the current political climate that we live in, I think we have, debatably the most out of control open border situation that I've ever heard of. And I think I would support anything that would immediately clamp down on that.
Yeah, it's really bad. I had a Border Patrol agent on my show literally like a couple of days ago. And, I used to work in immigration myself when I worked for the government. And when he was telling me what's going on at the border, it's absolutely crazy and ludicrous. And the American public doesn't know But like, yeah, they're literally. I've never seen a border crisis this bad. So okay, so you're for it, but it's got to be extremely selective. Okay, abortion / reproductive rights. Where do you stand there?
I'm pro-life.
You're pro-life. Okay, so you actually are not. Okay, would you say that deviates a little bit from the libertarian sense, where they're kind of like, hey, you should be able to have pro-choice?
No, I mean, look, they're in the same way that I was saying with conservatives, like who say being a conservative means supporting Israel or being a conservative means supporting Ukraine or something like that. No, I would just look. I actually was pro-choice for most of my life without ever really thinking about it.
Gotcha.
And then I started re-questioning that for a while, because I heard some really good pro-life arguments. And then it was the birth of my first child. Since the day my oldest was born, I've never once thought about it again, and I'm very strongly pro-life. And really the experience, which I'm sure if there's dads who are listening to this, they can understand where I'm coming from. The real experience was just holding my daughter the first day she was born and realizing, which, you know, because I'm a big dumb monkey, like a lot of us are, and I never really realized until I held that little girl in my arms, and I had to have this dumb monkey thought where I was like, wow, what I'm holding right now was just inside my wife's tummy. And that was the same thing that like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I was just, you know, and it's so almost like simple, but so like with my daughter was she was a week overdue or whatever, like she was a week past my wife's due date, and my son was 3 weeks early. And the reason my daughter was born was because they induced my wife. They don't really let you go that long over your due date anymore. They've kind of determined that it's unhealthy to go too long. Like your mother or your grandmother might have a story about being like 3 weeks late. You don't really have that anymore because they just induce you now. And I just kind of realized through all of that it's like, oh, like it's totally arbitrary that she came out today and now she's a baby. Wait, tell me, 3 weeks ago, she was still my baby. I didn't just have a baby today. I've had a baby for a while. It's just been inside my wife. And once I realized that, it was almost just like the logical conclusion was inevitable. And you're like, oh, you could actually take this all the way back to conception. The point is you can't kill babies. That's just not right. So
gotcha. So
that was it
for
for
you.
me.
There's no time limit, like at inception, like, you know, because I know in Florida, I think it's up to 6 weeks if I'm not mistaken. So for you, it's like no, it's at inception, it's pro, no matter what.
Yes, but I also at the same time, that's what I believe. But I also am a pragmatist. So like if abortion was legal in wherever the jurisdiction that you are is, and then someone proposed a 6 week ban, I wouldn't be like, no, that's not good enough. We need a 0 week ban. Like, okay, better a 6 week ban than no ban at all. So, but yes, my position, I do think there should be exceptions. Like there are extraordinary cases where like if they detect some type of like horrible genetic disease in the baby, and the baby's only going to live for like 2 years if it comes out or something like that, then I think like it's reasonable to say like it's the parents' decision what they want to do. In the same way that like I'm against murder, but if you had a family member who's about to die a very painful death and they were like, I'd rather be put out of my misery, I think that should be legal to do. Like I do believe in some exceptions,
of course,
but generally speaking, I'm pro-life.
Okay. Dave, real quick. I'm going to call some names. Give me your honest opinion.
Sure.
Candace Owens.
Love her. I just absolutely love Candace Owens. And she's someone who I will confess I had totally misjudged before I knew her.
Really?
And I think so she had a clip on Joe Rogan's podcast like years ago where she really stumbled over the climate change issue. And I remember seeing it and going kind of like, oh, come on, man. Like you didn't know what you were talking about. Like,
she said it was fake.
You know, and just kind of dismissing her. And then when she started taking the stand that she was taking at the Daily Wire after October 7th, I was just like so impressed by that. And I was like, wow, that's really something that she would do that. And then I went and I did her shows. The first time I ever met her, she was still on the Daily Wire. It was toward the end of it though. And I remember as I sat down with her and we just talked, we did the show and then we talked for like another hour or so after. And I was just like, wow, I actually think she's really smart and really like genuine and just a cool person. And she's been just nothing but cool to me since then. So I just have nothing but good things to say about Candace Owens. And it was a lesson in like, don't judge people too quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and I'm definitely want to ask you about some other stuff concerning her too. I just want to kind of get more of your political takes. All right, so we talked about immigration, abortion. What's your stance on foreign policy?
On foreign policy, like I said before, I'm a complete non-interventionist.
Okay.
I think that America and if you look at almost unanimously, and there were not too many things that the founders of America were unanimous on, but one of them was that the whole role of America is that we're supposed to be a city on a hill, And I don't think we should be going around the world with all of these bullshit excuses about how we're trying to spread freedom or democracy or any of this nonsense when everyone knows what it always comes down to is what special interests want. It's never about like any of these like ideological, like trying to help the people of that country. I think in the same way that if you were ever like let's say if I were ever to say to you that you were like, hey Dave, what are you working on? And I was like, well, I'm working on the house 3 doors down from me. I'm really working on their marriage. I'm trying to make sure that they have a really good marriage. And you'd be like, wait, is your marriage fucking perfect? Like your marriage better be fucking perfect before you're going and working on someone else's marriage. And so that's almost my attitude is like, hey, as soon as we perfect a free society here and we have the freest and most prosperous society in America, then maybe I'll listen to your arguments about how we have to go spread freedom to some other land. But until then, I don't want to hear any of that. So I don't want to hear anyone who's like, your marriage is falling apart and you're saying you're going to go fix someone else's marriage. We should be an example to the rest of the world about how great it is to be a free society. And in a weird way, which I'm sure like almost everybody listening to this probably knows in their own life, in a weird way, that is always the best thing you can do for someone else. Like what's the best thing you could do for someone you really love? Is it really that you could start micromanaging every part of their life? Or is the best thing you could do live your fucking life to the best you can and show them the example of that? And that's probably the best you could do for someone. So my foreign policy is strict non-interventionism, but total free trade. Trade with the world, be friends with the world, have détente, but no fucking, never fight a war unless you absolutely have to. And that means you're under threat.
Gotcha. So, and that's what actually perfect segue into what I was going to ask you next about the conflicts that we're involved in now, which real quick, guys, I want you to come on over to Twitch. We're going to get off YouTube now. So come on over to Twitch, guys. We dropped the link in there or Rumble, one of the two. And we're going to continue to interview over there. As you guys know, we're switching from live streaming on YouTube to Twitch predominantly. Yep. So come on over, guys. We're dropping a link in our YouTube and in our Rumble chat, whatever you guys may. If you're watching on Rumble, just open up a tab on Twitch. But yeah, so Dave, obviously right